Welcome to Inside the Outhouse, everyone. Great to have you all here. Great to see so much interest in this great topic of wages, salaries and pay. Come inside and have your say. My name's Pete Smith, founder, orator and telemarketer, and I'm going to throw over to Henry Friend for the the acknowledgement of country.
Thanks, Pete. In the spirit of reconciliation, Inside the Outhouse acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.
Thanks, Henry. Just reminding people that we are recording this session for the purpose of sharing it with those people who can't be inside the outhouse today. There will be a time where we'll let you know that the recording is stopped and you can feel free to stay in the room and have a chat after that time. We have put the burning questions for this topic up into the forum, and I'll just finish by saying if we could just be wise and respectful of each other as we have this conversation around this very interesting topic. Thanks very much. And the first question is, do people working in all levels of the outdoor sector receive a fair wage?
Well, certainly from my email, my Facebook and other discussions in this with various people, I think the answer is no. Some do, some don't. And there's a lot of disagreement about what a fair wage might be, of course. Yeah.
David, since you started the conversation, and it's been an ongoing conversation for, I think, several years within different industry circles, since you started it again on Facebook just after the new year, what brought you to the conclusion that, as a sector, we need to review wages again, or attempt to look at it?
Yep, I've been kicking around for a lot of years, and this subject has come up and been the part of formal discussions on many occasions, but it's never actually gone anywhere. But then the same could be said about a lot of other issues that the industry is facing. Certainly in discussions with people from peak bodies, some of the CEOs and other associates of mine, the pay and wages pay and conditions seem to be the easiest of many of the issues facing the industry to resolve. Admittedly, it might take some time. So I thought that was a good one to start a whole range of discussions about.
What do other people think? Do people think that within this sector, people are paid a fair wage?
Peter, my name's Terry Hewitt. I think I'm under Andrew McLaren's name. Can I ask a broader question? Because when it comes to wages, we've got a diversity of mix of those involved in the industry, from government to not-for-profit to the private sector. So how broad is this medium that we're talking in at the moment?
My personal opinion is that we need to start to look at setting a minimum wage system. And leaders are probably the starting point. Yeah, your basic leader that leads a group in the field. Certainly, like military and teachers already have probably what's considered a fair wage, but in your tourism, your outdoor education, your commercial operations, and a lot of other areas, mostly we don't.
It's interesting what you were saying a moment ago about the diversification of profits, not-for-profits, big businesses, small businesses, schools, you name it. I guess all of the fluctuations in the way that people are paid across those things make for some interesting things at a pricing level, and at a sort of a business sales level. It's difficult perhaps to have a level playing field there with such a rocky kind of pay scale. So it would be potentially nice to fill up some of those troughs.
Look, I totally agree with you. So if I give a couple of examples here in the West and why I asked that question, my business, the Venture Out, has been perennially gutted by private schools who can outpay any wage that I could pay for people who are well trained, brought up to speed, that are immediately engaged by the private school on a teacher's salary. So, you know, no matter how much work you do in training people, it is impossible to keep them because the price product that's in the market has been determined 25, 30 years ago by the lack of a policy called competitive neutrality, and that has allowed the Department of Sport and Rec camps to come in and determine the baseline price. So I think we're talking about a wonderful objective, and I really think that we've got to get on that page. I have been lobbying in Western Australia very hard to actually try and get all the different groups sitting down together. That has been impossible. I can add a little bit more if people want a little bit more background, because the plot is thickening quite substantially here in WA with my efforts.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on what's your sector, and what you're saying is that other kind of sectors within outdoor rec are kind of poaching people from you?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. It comes back to the base level of you being sustainable, and therefore how much can you pay someone. Now, I've always acknowledged to instructors that have anywhere between 5 to 10 years experience that have a value that should be recognised, similar to school teachers who run outdoor ed that are on 75, 80,000. However, you struggle to pay them 40. And that's primarily because the base product that we deliver has been set by government who are in breach of the competitive neutrality policy. You also have what was a rush. Now, I started my business in 1986. That was pre-not-for-profits coming into the sector, other than Outward Bound doing their little bucket. And it was pre-government departments coming into the sector. My business was copied completely by the department, even down to the wearing of the type of uniform that we had, which they plagiarised. Prices that you've never been able to compete against. So I have been head of numerous outdoor body private operators, which was the very first one was set up in '88. We all to what was the Adventure Industry Association in about 1995, and then the West Australian government encouraged that there be a collective of not-for-profits, social scouts, and those sorts of groups, private and government and school teachers all come together. I became the founding president of Outdoors WA and started to do the work of building a system of training and getting government training. I helped to set up NOLs and all of those things. However, the not-for-profits offer gifts of land which are quite substantial, which they're not mortgaged on like a private operator. You have the government who just doesn't disclose its details of how it sets its price. And what you're talking about here, wages have been determined by policies. Now, I'm sure, and my research is that Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland have been afflicted by this process that's been going for three decades now. I'd like some people to add any comment, either concur to that or to off the mark.
Yeah, is anybody else facing these kinds of issues in other states or across different sectors of outdoor?
It's certainly the same in Victoria, and I would imagine New South Wales. There are the same sort of barriers to a level playing field.
Okay, so if I share just for a couple of minutes where we're at in Western Australia, it may be a catalyst for assisting this process, which I think sustainability of the future with the best quality people delivering outdoor education comes down to the remuneration those individuals receive. So it is the number one outcome that across this sector we require if we are to have a career pathway. At the moment, individuals can struggle to get a mortgage, but it's possible to have a mortgage and a family, so they leave the industry. That's just how it is here in WA. So you can't put the combined together. Now, I persisted in going through various different government departments, both with Outdoors WA and as an industry peak body, and on my own. As an industry peak body, we took several years to get our first meeting with one of the public servants on reading our submission of net competitive advantage that the department had. This person took about 1 minute to read the document, threw it on the table, said, rewrite it. I'm not talking to you about this. So we went to the Director General and obtained another 2 meetings where it was talk to the hand. And nothing was going to be done by that department to administer its own policy of competitive neutrality. So we were deferred to the Department of Treasury to administer the policy. Obviously, I suppose the conflicting relationships that public servants have across different departments, they were forewarned, and we got totally stonewalled in that process of actually trying to bring something about. That was in 2008. Now, I've continued to lobby on my own and go through different government departments. I've been strung along for 2 to 3 years, meeting with the Director Generals of government departments in the Department of Finance, only to be humoured and to drag the process out and not get any information. Freedom of information has stopped at, it's impossible for us to bring up the archives going back further than 2000, and therefore the cost and just the effort to get those archives is impossible. So don't go there. So the process. I've gone through various different government departments where I met the minister who directly instructed his PA to put me in touch with the commissioner of the Small Business Development Corporation. Within a week of that meeting I had with the minister, I received a letter back from the federal government, Job Small Business, saying I need to speak with the commissioner of small business. So I forwarded that letter on to the commissioner of Small Business Development Corporation. I followed the next 3 months the minister's office to his PA, who never responded. I never got an invitation to go and have a meeting with the Small Business Development Corporation. I followed another 4 emails. Yep.
Sorry, Andrew. This is all really good. I'm just afraid it's getting a little bit off of our topic today.
Yeah.
So I think I made note of it so that we can maybe up into a later session.
Yep, I apologise because that's it. I feel any conversation around wages, unless you address the history, you're going nowhere.
That's okay.
Thank you. I won't say any more.
No, you're very passionate. We'll definitely address that maybe in a later session. I think we had a few other people who had Dylan Jones. You wanted to raise your hand?
Yeah, good evening. I was just reflecting on the comments from Andrew there about the competitive neutrality, and I don't doubt that there's definitely some truth and experience across various states with that. But one of the, I guess, rebuttals I have to that is that it doesn't seem to me that in the legal sector, where the government provides free legal services to the general public, that has any impact on the wages of lawyers across the country. And so I agree that that's a contributing factor, but there are lots of other systemic issues that play into that. And I think that for me, my experience of the state-run camps here in New South Wales has been that actually the wages have been very well paid inside those institutions for the workers, but it's the cost of the program bought by the purchasers that's at the low point, and in part that the reason for those low costs has got to do with guide to participant ratios rather than any subsidisation by that department of those things, and that's a factor of those government organisations making decisions, and I'm not speaking for all of them, but for some of them, making decisions about what kind of guide to participant ratios they're willing to accept and the risk tolerance that they have, and their interpretation of the adventure standards that may have been applicable at the time or now. So yeah, it's really quite a complex one, but yeah, I think that it's only one of a number of other issues that are going on. Thanks for letting me put in my 2 cents.
Thanks very much, Dylan.
Cool.
What do others think on this issue?
Sorry. Yes, so I'm the real Andrew McLaren. The other one's an imposter, that's Terry Hewitt. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, great. So I'm the general manager at Adventure Out, and I obviously work in a lot of different sectors of the business where I look for the work, I quote the work, I write the programs, and obviously hire the staff from there. And I also work in the field as well. So I'm from a building background, and even in a managerial position, I still have to work 1 day a week in the building industry to support family, mortgage, the rest of it as well. So even though I'm pricing the jobs, to actually get them, pricing the programs, to actually get them, we have to price them at an amount that we do have to obviously pay less than, for instance, the private schools where they pay for their staff, and it makes it a bit tricky to get quality staff. And we look for staff who are passionate about what they do rather than how much money they're going to get out of the program.
Cheers for that, Andrew. Thank you. What do people perhaps in other states think about this conversation?
I'm happy to chime in from South Australia, if that's okay. My name's Anthony. I recognise a few names on there, but this is my first sign into inside the Outhaus, so thank you for having me. I'm a head of an outdoor education at a private school in Adelaide, and I'd like to chime in a little bit to the issues we have in South Australia with pay rates for primarily our casual staff. At our school, our outdoor education casual staff sit outside of our EBA at the school, so we have them all on individual contracts. The problem is, and I think it's the same in many other states, and the private business owners have just indicated this, is that private schools are driving up the pay rates in South Australia for sure, to the point where we're quite a high level private school, and I think we're well and truly overpaying our staff. I think the main problem is to get the good ones. The schools are just keep paying more and more on casual contracts or casual arrangements to get the better staff, competitive employment world. I think the debate really needs to start though from we need a federal award. I know in South Australia, I've been around the traps a fair bit in South Australia, and I know that we used to try and base our salaries and our wages on the Outdoor Workers Award from Queensland. That obviously went out the window many, many years ago, and since then it's just been guess how much we should pay people. I think we definitely need some guidelines. From my perspective, we need a lot of guidelines written around overnights and passive hours and active hours and in the field payments. I think it's a world that needs some clarity. That's my 2 cents worth anyway.
That's good, well said.
Thanks, Anthony. I think from what I understand that recreation is often on the same award rate as carnival folk and miscellaneous.
Yeah, we have to follow the amusement in Melbourne. We had some legal advice a few years ago after we had some staff complaining about pays, and the legal advice required us to get a employment contractor, and we actually employed an employee, and they came back and said that it's too broad, you need to go amusement. fitness and all the recreation old awards no longer stand. Cover your butts and use this one. And it's obviously a higher paying award than the others, with much higher, obviously more casual rates than others. We just had to follow it. So now our staff are paid quite heavily.
Yeah, so we do the same. We pay Employee Sure, and they give us advice. But we have our staff under miscellaneous award, which is obviously a lot different to yours there.
It also pays more than the amusement award.
Well, there you go.
What would be in the looking through the participants list here, there's a lot of people who have commented on this for many years. What would be the barriers to having a national award as people currently see it that would apply to the private sector, to the not-for-profit, and any organization that doesn't have their own award or certified agreement?
I don't think there's any barriers other than us all getting together as a national group through perhaps the Outdoor Council of Australia. We would need to, if we went to an award, we would need to find the funds to develop such a thing. But all these things are possible if we can work as a national group together. It might take a number of years, I might add.
Dom, do you want to comment on that, given your role at that level?
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, I'll just turn my video on. I've got pretty dodgy internet, but hopefully it'll be right. Yeah, I'm the president of the Outdoor Council of Australia, and it's good to see quite a few familiar faces, but also some other people on here to join this chat. I think there is a role for the Outdoor Council of Australia in this space, as well as the various state peak bodies and other national organisations. I think, as David said, probably the key thing is going to be about trying to fund it to get, if we were going to go to a national award. And obviously Queensland had an award many years ago, which I think it might have been Anthony mentioned that one before, that we did have an award. And then when they rolled them all up into all the modern awards, the Queensland award got disappeared, if that's a correct language. Pete, you probably be able to use a better word than I can at this time of the evening. But yeah, so the Queensland award disappeared when they did the changeover with all the modern awards. And the only thing I guess one of the things I don't know is what's the level of work that is required to get to that point. And also, I know that what the big drive was to simplify all the awards, where they were trying to group them all together, which I think we've sort of got caught in the crossfire a little bit of that process as an industry. They're never seen as large enough to have our own specific one. And this is where it gets awfully confusing. So we had discussions, I can't remember, probably 2 or 3 years ago now, with even the Fair Work Ombudsman in relation to pay and conditions. And that was a national conversation was going on then. And that was even about what is a reasonable, pay for a day's work, and where does a day stop and start, and what are the hours that you should or shouldn't be paid for in relation to like an expedition program or something like that. And even that curled the hair of the people from the Fair Work Ombudsman. They were sitting there seriously trying to work out what we were trying to tell them people in our industry genuinely worked. And like even the point of, are you on a break? If you're sitting at a remote campsite and you're still on call the whole time, if someone has an incident or gets unwell or whatever, are you actually on a break, or should you be, somehow compensated for that time? And where does it start and stop? And they were really quite, you could see they were intrigued by the process without trying to, it was all about, well, how does this all apply and what's right? So I think it's a really complex matter. And I think David just said it could take quite a bit of time. And I tend to agree with that. I think this isn't a short-term solution where a few of us write out what we think should be in an award and send that off to some bureaucrat in Canberra and they say, yeah, that sounds good to us. I think this is it's quite a convoluted process, and I'm not sure that it's going to be something that we're going to, solve in any any short term, I suppose.
Can I ask the people who were part of that conversation from a couple of years ago, and maybe you're the one to comment on this, Dom, do you think that that was because the Fair Work Ombudsman and people like that just have a lack of understanding of really what happens in terms of our workplace and its uniqueness?
There's certainly an element of that, Pete, that they probably hadn't even considered, that some people don't go home every day, that they're out and about and they're working constantly. And they, this is I can't remember who someone said before, it might have been Andrew said before about looking for people who actually genuinely are committed to this work. And that's awesome. But at the same time, the challenge is what's the right pay and the fair pay for those people to do the work that they do that makes such a difference to the clients at the end of the day. But the other bit, which I don't know whether it was David touched on, it might have actually been Terry, what's a fair rate for your clients to pay for those programs? And I think Terry's point before of if there's a government centre that's going to undercut you because they don't have the same costs, that really hurts. And I guess this is all these flow-on effects that it's so hard to look at one piece of this in isolation. And but yeah, the whole thing of having staff who are passionate and therefore willing to do it for less money, that's that's not going to be someone for a career. That's not going to be someone paying their mortgage on long term. And I think that's the biggest challenge, that is that career progression that we need. But yeah, to answer your question, sorry, Pete, I kept on rambling. The real answer is, yeah, they didn't really understand what staff in the outdoor, particularly outdoor education, do on a day-to-day basis, or it's actually more a week-to-week basis is the piece. Because as you guys know better than I do, the hours you do week to week vary quite widely depending on your tasks.
I think Dylan makes an excellent point in the chat where he talks about our representation in those conversations. Thanks for that, Dylan. What do other people think?
One thing Dom just talked about, he talked about the viability of staying within the field as you move, as you progress through different levels of being an outdoor rec or ed. Is the pay sustainable even as you move up to make that a full-time career choice with the family and a mortgage? What are your thoughts on that?
Not everybody is going to stay in the industry and move their way through. So certainly we need to look at different levels. But for instance, the amount of time people go and train, do a certificate for, or whatever it might be, come in the industry, and most of them are gone within 2 years. Yeah, so they're often spending 3 or 4 years training and staying in the industry a couple of years. If we can extend the length of time that people stay in the industry, some of them might stay longer, but if we could extend the average to 5 years, for instance, that would save a huge amount of money in training, and quality and a whole range of things.
That was exactly my story as well. So in my early 20s, I started in the outdoors, did it for 5, 6 years and realized there's no money in it. Went back to building for 25 years and I'm back in the outdoors now. So I've gone from earning a lot of money to not much money because I love this job. It's I guess it's a passion that I've always been interested in. I really love the job, but at the same time, if it could pay well better, it would be great.
I'd like to speak on what Dylan just said, where we were poorly measured, understood and represented in the conversations. I think in the past, it's been hard to bring people together in the outdoor industry, either within a state. But with COVID last year, with all these Zoom meetings and people starting to talk together, this particular session is a good example. I think we can now bring the broad part of the industry together to come to a resolution of this problem or this issue and come up with some guidelines to move forward with. We managed to do it with the Adventure Activity Standards, which we released in 2019, I think. So we should build on that. And there are going to be barriers to implementing whatever we come up with. But once we decide on what fair pay might be, we then should look at what are the barriers to implementing fair pay and how do we deal with those.
I think our visibility as an industry, not being a big enough player, has become almost irrelevant. Laurie at Outdoors New South Wales promoting and directly engaging with the Premier about the fact that school camps weren't valuable enough to be run during the pandemic or the later part of it is a reflection of the fact that we're really valuable right now to our clients, our young people, and this is the time to engage our value and market that, and that will push and drive a potential, understanding of what our industry does in the general world, and specifically how we can then move that towards better wages and conditions.
Just make a couple of comments if I could. Know quite a few of you here. I'm just at Wodonga, so I'm in vocational education. And I'd say that the graduates I see go through and do a Cert 4 or a diploma, they usually take a year out of their life, pay quite a bit of money, and are usually quite passionate about entering the field. But I reckon some of the better ones, I would say, end up as professional fireys. Quite a few end up as paramedics or join the police force. And you see them 10 years later, and you look at the house they've just built and the holiday they've just been on, and you go like, I don't know if we necessarily want to compare it to someone who's, like a paramedic, for example. But it should be up there. It should be able to give them a lifestyle where they can maintain that. They do invest and train hard and put in a lot to actually get the skills that they need. But 2 or 3 years, and there are some amazing employers, but there are some employers that really stuff them around. They get burnt, they lose money, they end up doing days they get no pay for, and they just get a bit jack of it after a while, and end up going into different fields. So I know that around here in Victoria, there's a lot that treat it a little bit like a working holiday. And there are quite a few international staff who come to Australia on a working visa. In the last 10, 15 years I've been around, and they just they're over here just to, from the UK or the US to have a working holiday for a couple of years and then they go home. So they're not really interested in paying a mortgage or getting a lifetime career. So there is a few issues there, I think, that are problematic with the industry. And I don't know what. I certainly enjoy the chats, the discussion David's put up, and Dylan, and appreciate what you've done here, Pete. Good to hear from Western Australia and what's going over there. I don't know how I can help, but I'd certainly like to be in the background helping out with this sort of like discussion, because I think it's a really important one. That's about all from me.
If I can I just jump in and throw my 2 cents, unless anyone else is lined up? Perfect. I had to pick someone up from the train station, so I apologise if this is a repeat of something that's already been said. But just following on from what's been said then, this year is my 9th year in the industry, I think, mostly freelancing, and I love it. And it's had some amazing opportunities internationally, but that's the exact reason why I'm heading towards teaching, because it's more stable. And because it can pay for those holidays and pay for those houses, and not mansions on the beach, but even just like a simple house. And don't get me wrong, I love my time traveling internationally, but I kind of got to a point where I was living paycheck to paycheck, contract to contract, and I was in these amazing places internationally and interstate, but I couldn't actually afford to enjoy my experience there myself. Because I was so busy working, and also when I wasn't working, I didn't have the money to go to those nice hotels or even just simply go and do a trip that I wanted to do. And I think that's a shame, because then more and more people are heading to the more stable industries, hopefully more outdoor ed teaching, so we at least retain some of those, some of that experience within the industry. But a lot of my friends have headed towards the same thing, paramedics or fireys. And I've had this discussion with a few people over here in WA that we're losing that middle ground of experience. So those people coming in, the backpackers and the people fresh out of TAFE, fresh out of uni, 18-year-olds are happy to do it for peanuts. And that's fine, that's great. and then you got the people sitting on comfortable, whatever that comfortable bracket is in the office, coordinating the programs. But then you've got that gap where people who are about half a decade to a decade who aren't coordinators but can't afford to live on this group leader wage are leaving the field, and then there's this gap between this growing divide between young backpackers or young 18-year-olds and the heads of department or coordinators sitting in the office. And I think the more you lose that, the more you lose actual in the field important training that you just can't learn in uni or TAFE.
Stuart, I'll just jump in there. Do you believe in your experience as a field practitioner? It's because as someone who's directly delivering the content, you're on the same pay every year, regardless of your experience and your skills, whereas teachers step up every year with experience and skills. But our industry doesn't reflect that in pay and conditions generally.
Yeah, I think that's the case. And the other thing that comes with that is the sense of respect that goes hand in hand with the salary that you earn. And the salaries, a comfortable salary is important, but I, as a general rule, don't take lots of contracts that don't pay well unless I know that company personally well. Not necessarily because of the pay's low, but because if I'm paid well, my value is translated in that. So if I make a hard decision in the field, that worst comes to worst is pull the program because I feel it's unsafe. That's reflected through management. They say, okay, we've paid this person well, he's got this industry experience, that's good. Whereas if and this is a very real experience by a lot of my colleagues, if we're paid peanuts and we say, oh no, this is uncomfortable, I don't like this, the unfortunate response is often, oh, well, we'll just get somebody else to come and run that program.
Can I extend the question then to the wider room and the group? Should we be reflecting experience and specialist skills in reimbursement of staff in a more intentional and deliberate way?
I agree, yes. Yeah, both we need to look at what qualifications mean as far as pay and conditions, and certainly competence and experience should be reflected in some way. How we do that, who knows? But I think it's one of the key parts for this whole discussion to take it forward.
I would actually say no to that to a certain degree in terms of what does the job require versus what does the person have. If the person has, say, a PhD, but they're doing a job role that requires a certificate for, then as an employer, I just need them to do the job they're doing. So I feel like sometimes, and for example, Coefficient has this method of breaking down what staff is required at what level. If you require a staff to have a certain level of experience and certain level of skills, then they should be reimbursed for that. But if they're doing a job that doesn't require those skills, it's a great bonus that they have them, but that shouldn't necessarily be reimbursed for them, because then ultimately we'll be paying someone who's been in the field for quite a long time. If they're doing, say, like a centre-based day, we could end up paying, double the money that we're paying someone who had lesser experience but is ultimately doing the same job.
Can I just jump in and make a comment there? I'm going to present a bit of an alternative view, John. Thanks for your comment. I think that someone who, say, has had 15 years of field experience brings more to an instructional role than someone who, say, has had 3 years of field experience. Comments?
I'd like to agree with that, Pete. First time I've spoken here at Inside the Outhouse. Hello, everybody. Andrew Watts. I'm from Box Hill Institute down here in Melbourne. Spent a lot of time looking over these issues. I'm hearing a few things that are similar across the board here. I think if we're going to try and encourage people to stay in the industry for longer, then there needs to be some kind of progression. There needs to be reward for effort, whether that's upskilling, requalling, experience-based remuneration. I think all those things are attributable to helping keep them in the industry. It's probably the biggest issue, in my opinion, that we face, and that is staff turnover. In regards to hearing some of the various situations, some of our students from finishing their course last year have got themselves into going into employment this year. There's a very broad spectrum of pay rates out there. That's students that are looking interstate and Victoria, both within Victoria and within interstate different borders, things like that. So, and those broad differences are significant to the point where some employers paying double what others are paying their new people that have just been hired. So there's those factors that do exist out there, and I think if we move on to some of the other challenges that this particular issue faces, there is going to be challenges such as government-based organisations. There's going to be differences between private and or private commercial operators and, for instance, private schools or schools in general. All of those things are going to exist. We need to act. That's the key thing. I think this particular issue has got to a point, especially through the socials and the onset of many different forums, where there is significant talk about the differences in pay, and there's certainly a groundswell growing about it, and they're going to expect us as leaders to do something about it, I would suggest. So whatever the next step is, it needs to be taken. And I'm not quite sure who that person is we need to talk to, but whether it's Fair Work, whether it's state government going on to federal government, but I think the best solution that we can come to is to get a fair and equitable award-based system that at least can cover a very substantial section of our employment targets and people. That's my $20. I'm going to raise the price from the 10 cents and 2 cents that have been offered so far.
Chair, may I have an opportunity to just share briefly to build on that point? Does that go?
Yep.
Okay, I think what's going to support the solution is having some definitions. A lot of organisations use the word outdoor education and builds resilience. There are, if I take the state-based government programs, they've almost created a theme ride, which is an outdoor experience facilitated by 18-year-olds. 18-year-olds can't facilitate the learning to build that core of understanding that builds to resilience for young people. The more mature, the more experience an individual has, they're able to facilitate the experience and bed down resilience. So unless we have some definitions around the activities, the outdoor activities, what people are trying to achieve, because we have such diversity now across the different spectrums of government, not-for-profit, private, outdoor education through schools, state and private. They all approach it in a different way, and to reflect someone's remuneration, that comes in very closely, their ability to facilitate the experience and bed down that for the younger person to build that core of resilience. Thank you.
I might just step in here. Oh. Sorry, guys. I hope you can hear me okay. My internet's really bad. I was just hoping that maybe we could hear from some of the ladies in the group. This has been a very male-dominated conversation, and I know we've got a lot of wonderful women in the group who've been in the outdoors for a while. Maddie, Tegan, any of you other ladies like to add to the conversation?
I will try my best to add to this conversation. I'm relatively new to the field. I think there's a couple of points that have sort of like flitted through my brain while listening to all of your points. I think it's interesting, maybe as a student doing my bachelor in outdoor leadership, I think maybe this conversation needs to be had at a student level. And brought up sort of like as we're studying and talked about a little bit more, because you know, you look at the the wage for an outdoor facilitator or outdoor educator, and you have all of these different things that mean different things, different positions that mean different things, and they all have like sort of different wage estimates when you're sort of gauging what career you're going to go into. And then like I think that will then create an understanding as to what to ask of your employer, which is really interesting. I, as a time will tell, Cherie, and I can imagine the other ladies have definitely heard of this plenty of times before. In many industries, this happens, and that's that men are definitely very confident in asking for more for their services, and women definitely will be more accepting of taking a lower wage. And I think it's interesting to open up a conversation about wages so that that doesn't happen. I haven't had enough outdoor experience to know if that's the case in the outdoor industry, so I can't comment on that. My last point was thoughts around utilising types of programs to then help define rates of pay, because I think that, you know, you get your 4 main types of programming, which is like the recreational, educational, developmental and therapeutic, which all require almost like a level up in skills and qualifications. Could be a potential baseline to look at.
Thanks, Maddie. Those are some really great points, and it's good to hear a younger student perspective as well.
Can I just say that out of all those who enrol in the Cert 4 or Diploma in Outdoor Rec, we usually have a fairly even balance of 50-50. It's pretty much always as it is again this year, a few more females, so maybe 55% females. Usually by the end of the course, there's probably switches the other way. There's just a few more males who finish it than the females. But job opportunities, it is not rare that the females who graduate will be offered better paying jobs straight out of the course, just because they're needed for ratios in a lot of outdoor ed centres, which may have more males than females, and they need those females for the trips and the guiding the women on it. So there is quite a few options out there, I've found, for our females who graduate and get into the field. I don't know, probably just anecdotally, but I don't think there's any real pay discrepancy or difference in what I've seen.
When we talk about the whole grand scheme of how to keep people into the outdoors, one thing I'll say as a female in the outdoors is that Ray, we've had this discussion before about women in pregnancy and how that affects their career, not just in terms of, which it affects men as well. I will say fathers do get affected as well, but especially for women, me being currently pregnant and not being able to do anything in the outdoors because I physically can't do a lot of the activities, so just looking for, I guess, work opportunities that allow more avenues for women to navigate that part of their life but still stay in the field would just be personally another way to kind of help keep more women in the field longer.
I was fortunate enough to have both of my kids while I still worked, being that we're a base camp, so we don't have to go off site. So I was able to live there and still have my children come to work with me and work, which made things great. But it also meant that I had amazing bosses that let that happen, who were family people. So they were very happy to have my children, and still are, have my children come to work, let me get them to school and stuff on time and leave early enough to pick them up. But I do know that it is hard from the management position to let that happen as well. And yes, that what you're saying is with the children and families, especially the parents, the mums, they all stop working. I can only admit that our staff females are generally in their 20s, and once we hit the 30s, they're pretty much all male staff above that, because they're seen as the breadwinners, which isn't what I would consider myself to be. I'm in my 30s, but I've just been lucky in that way.
I think they're really good points, Lauren, and it also gets me thinking back to some of the other points that were made earlier in terms of the casualised workforce that we have and how prevalent that is across the industry, certainly in Victoria. The seasonal nature of the job, especially when you look at journey-based providers and the amount of them that have such a high intake of the workforce. If it's so casualised, well, then those extra additions that would come in a normal agreement or contract around maternity leave, around paternity leave, those sort of things would not be achievable for many people. I know certainly at a previous employer of mine, I was lucky enough to be in a management position when we had our first youngster and was on a full-time ongoing contract at that stage. So I was just lucky. I think out of the maybe 30 to 50 seasonal staff members that worked for that particular organisation on any given year or any given season, 7 to 12 were full-time or ongoing contracted staff members, and the rest were casual. So if any of those casuals that came through that system had the same situation family-wise, then they just wouldn't be in the position where they'd be able to get those same benefits that I was lucky enough to have. So that is just another key perspective or point, I should say, to the whole argument about the workforce and its casualisation, the amount of time that people stay in, and we can only try and benefit them more. So, and there has to, look, personally, looking at all this sort of stuff, there has to be a change in the way we go about it in order to make all this work as an industry, I think. We've got a lot towards the beautiful weather, and certainly in Victoria, the winter, things pretty much close up. There's not a great deal of outdoor education that goes over the 3 months of winter. So you think that, that's one particular issue that's a hindrance to full-time work, to therefore people coming in and staying in for longer, and therefore gaining those benefits to be able to do the things they want to do with their family and their mortgages.
Yep.
Thanks, Andrew. Very valid points. I think there's some interesting comments going on the chat, which I just want to draw people's attention to around, it's not really a pay issue, but maybe a sustainability of the actual job issue. Maybe people could comment on that.
One of the things I put in there was, is the actually sustainable? When we have our peaks, as if we talk about, we've got some weeks where we've got so much work, and the next week there could be absolutely nothing. So throughout the year, which is largely what's probably led to the casualisation of the workforce, because a business can't necessarily employ someone for 52 weeks of the year when there might only be 20 weeks of work in that year. And so we talk about sustainability. Yeah, fantastic. We could pay someone $50 an hour, but if they're only able to work less than half of the year, just on time alone, let alone with other issues such as that Dylan mentioned, such as being able to have a life, that physical and mental strain as well, then what's the point of increasing that pay if actually it is seasonal work? It's like, going to the skiing and that seasonal thing. We only go only when there's snow. And it's a similar thing. I think the issue that I face when I've taken bookings and tried to organise staff is that schools typically want to book in for a certain week because of exams, because of NAPLAN, swimming, carnivals. We don't want it too close to the end of the term. We don't want it too close to the start of term. So all these different variables puts a lot of programs in at the same time. So you end up with this huge peak of needing staff. And then, as I say, the next week you don't need so much. So I think, pay is fantastic. Whilst the miscellaneous award isn't necessarily the best, if we're paying people per hour, I worked it out in terms of someone on expedition. If you work it out, someone 13, 14 hour day with the penalty rates, it's there about $400 per day. But if they're only getting that for a certain number of weeks a year, can they sustain that? Do all the on weeks make up for the off weeks? And I don't know if it necessarily.
And I think that's why the discussion, like some of the others, Dylan and others pointed out, we need to think the pay is sort of a discussion point, but it's actually the broader conditions around the employment, where it goes, and how we keep people in. It's a much broader issue, and the pay is just that central bit.
Just want to alert people to what Jack has said in the chat. He makes a comment as previously announced as a freelancer, and he says there's a lot of work out there for casual freelancers, but people are under the impression that if all casuals boycotted the sector, the outdoor ed work sector, the industry would not operate. What do people think about that?
I'll just chime in one thing on that, which is that I think that a distinction needs to be made between employers that are not paying the legal minimum pay rates required in their workplace, and those that, and then the discussion about what people would like the pay to be. And I absolutely think that those employers that are not paying the minimum required pay rates for their workplace, that absolutely they should be brought up to speed. But I disagree that if there was a conversation about increasing pay in the long term, that the industry would fall over. I think that there's other issues other than dollars going on in that conversation around marketing, communications, the value of what our services are to society, and I'll come back to the marketing one again about differentiating ourselves and say, well, why should you adventure here in Australia? What do you get versus going overseas? Why should you invest in outdoor education rather than classroom education? All those kinds of conversations that we as an industry do a fairly poor job as a whole to communicate to our communities and to our legislators and our funders in the government and in private stakeholders and other places.
So, Dylan, who would that fall to address that? Are we looking back to our peak industry bodies? So, Outdoors Queensland, Outdoors New South Wales, and ACT, Outdoors WA. Who are we going to be solutions driven for this, to take that next step?
Can I talk on the marketing one?
I'll just answer that really quickly, Dave. And yes, I do believe that the peak bodies have a key role to play, as do major employers and any other employer conglomerates that do or don't exist in our industry. But I also think that trying to figure out how to address the issue of the fact that we are poorly measured, understood and represented is actually part of the problem. But it's really been fantastic in the last 12 months to see a shift in our state bodies and the emergence finally of a peak Australian body that is feeling more effectual in recent times. It's been really awesome.
Reference the marketing thing, which is only one of the parts of what was mentioned by Dylan. Andrew from Outdoors Victoria talked to me last Friday and said that he sees Outdoors Victoria role in marketing the industry so that we're valued better, and lobbying the Education Department and other agencies as one of the key things that his organisation, Outdoors Victoria, needs to do as far as sustainability in the industry. And I know that Laurie at Outdoors New South Wales, who couldn't be here tonight because she's got family commitments, has been pushing exactly the same thing. So I think the peak bodies are the people that can do some of this stuff, and I think they're moving in some of these directions already.
Hey, David, if I could just comment on that one too. Yeah, I guess the same for Outdoors Queensland. That's something we're looking at as far as promoting outdoor activities and the outdoors in general. Probably the one, not a rider, but one comment I would make on that is, don't forget our roles are to represent the entire outdoor sector. So outdoor education is an important part of that, but it's not our whole focus. And that's, I think, sometimes where this can get a little bit distracted, where there's a whole lot of times where as peaks, we're trying to do a lot of things for a lot of different people, and we tend to get spread quite thin because we're not, super well resourced organisations, that sort of thing. So I completely take the point. It's part of our role is the marketing of the outdoors and the benefits of the outdoors, and contributing to research and publicising those things and getting in the ear of the decision makers. And the other one is probably that I think in the outdoor ed world, that probably came out during COVID is the importance of outdoor education for the education departments. So it isn't an afterthought. So for education departments, that was a key thing for us last year, was advocating for the education departments to take a reasonable approach to the return to outdoor ed in the schools. So there was one thing about convincing the world of, you know, the health authorities, but it was also about getting education on board. And that was a harder task than I thought it should be, if that makes sense. Within education, it was more difficult than I thought it was going to be to actually put the hand up and say, hang on, don't forget about outdoor education. This is a very important part of the education system. And yeah, so I think that's an important part of it too.
We also have to sort of look at getting the other stakeholders to support what we do in them as well. Things like in Melbourne, Parks Victoria, like we get charged to go into their land and those sort of things. We have to add those things onto costs of everything else. The schools want to pay the lowest possible money to go on a camp, and they search around for that. I get that. I would too. However, we have to pay our staff, which in some cases could be almost 50% of business. Insurance now has absolutely destroyed us in some cases, and in some businesses are over $100,000 premium, which is almost unjustifiable to start with without even paying a staff member a cent. And then you've got all your parks fees and all the other things you have to pay. Having the wages set at a level that we can all achieve will help us with the industry. I believe going with the insurance side, now that they're pushing, saying that all our staff have to be highly qualified and all this, and experience isn't as good as what qualifications can be. And in some cases, I believe that's not always the truth. Sometimes the people that have got the experience are going to be much more better than somebody who sat in a classroom for 4 years because they thought it was fun after high school and then left after 4 years because there's actually work involved. And I think that if we don't have some sort of leveled field, and not just in Victoria alone, it's going to have to be national, because they get here, they go, oh, I can get more money in Queensland. I'm flying to Queensland tomorrow, not that you can out of Melbourne at the moment, and we'll go up there and work. Follow the weather. Go to, you know, I know some friends that are snowboard instructors, and they have a 3 thing in the year: Canada, Japan, and Australia.
Thanks very much, Lauren. Very valid points, and it's perhaps opened up another conversation on this very complex issue. We're just going to stop the recording there. What a fabulous discussion. I'd just like to thank everyone for being inside the Outhaus and their fabulous input. I think we're going to probably take this topic on again, because I feel like we've just really hit the start of the conversation and there's much more to talk about. Thanks very much. Feel free to stay in the room and continue the conversation without the recorded part. Thank you again.